Designating Mexican drug cartels as foreign terrorist organizations. This is quite a step. President Trump has said that they are getting close to doing it, that he wants to do it, that it is going to happen. Now, this comes in the aftermath of the massacre of the LeBaron family, and I would note that when that initially came out, I said to you, the fact pattern does not add up to mistaken identity. It was not mistaken identity. Now everyone, based on the additional stories that have come out, I think understands that it was a mass assassination of women and children by the cartel. So it was not mistaken identity. I stand behind that, and I think it looks like I was quite correct the day of. And even the administration was initially going off of reports that said that it might have been an accident. The cartel, they were executing women and children at close range. They knew exactly what was going on. And then they're burning the bodies afterwards. One of the mothers tried to convince them to stop. She came out of the vehicle after being wounded, and they killed her. I mean, they knew exactly what they were doing. They knew who they were shooting. So we should all be clear on that, and I think that our analysis of that from the opening hours after the incident has been proven correct, as I would have anticipated. But now we look at, okay, how do we deal with this? How many arrests has the Mexican government made of that ambush? Remember, they're U.S. citizens, my friends. So these are ours down there who were killed. They're dual citizens, but they are U.S. citizens. They have U.S. citizenship. 0 arrests from the Mexican government of the cartels thus far, or anyone in the cartels responsible for this. Think about the message that sends: law and order in a country like this, where you have an assassination of women and children by heavily armed men with machine guns, most likely. That's what the reporting was at the time. Certainly heavily armed, regardless. And there's no arrests, because the expectation in Mexico is that there generally won't be an arrest, because rule of law and order have broken down in that country. I would just want to ask the question. I do have to wonder at some point, why is it that when you stand, as I have, on the U.S.-Mexico border at San Diego and Tijuana, why is it that on the one side of that fence you have order, you have rule of law, you have police that are overwhelmingly trustworthy and honorable, and you go a couple hundred yards over the fence in the other direction, and you have none of that? Does anyone ever stop to try to answer that question? What exactly causes that difference? Not allowed to discuss, not allowed to know why Mexico, a country that's actually quite rich in natural resources, that has the wealthiest, most benevolent neighbor in the world in America, obviously tremendous benefit to the Mexican economy, and now is when everyone's saying, oh, but the Mexicans have been such a benefit to the U.S. economy. Okay, yes, but point being, why is Mexico as a country so messed up? People would say, oh, the drug war, Buck. Well, it was messed up before the drug war. Before the production of heroin and opioids and cocaine and other things were, before the production and distribution was essentially consolidated by the Mexican drug cartels. They're the most powerful criminal syndicates in the world now. They have vast amounts of wealth, and there are people who are very senior in these organized crime groups who will engage in the worst kinds of depravity and violence imaginable. So the designation as a foreign terrorist organization, what will this do? There will be some immediate leverage on the financial side, which is a good thing. The best way to fight the cartels would be to seize all of their cash. And in fact, I think that the seizure of cartel cash should be set up as a means of, maybe funding the wall, funding law enforcement, funding resettlement efforts for those who are seized at the border, who are not going to be given refugee status. Pay for the flights back to whatever country they came from. A lot of things we could do with that money that should be taken, should be seized from the cartels. So there's a lot of teeth in the policy of when you designate somebody an FTO on the financial side. There's a lot that can be done, so that's good. Immediately, though, the concerns shift to the possibility of U.S. unilateral kinetic action, a fancy way of saying we send, who knows, special DEA teams, perhaps special forces, Delta, who knows? We send them down on occasion to pick up, or perhaps, let's just say pick up for our purposes today, take some members of the cartel war off the battlefield. Now, I think that's unlikely to happen because of the possible blowback. I don't see that happening, but there's a tremendous focus on that. It does remind me a bit of the Day of the Soldado movie from, what was that? Sicario 2. Sicario 1 was pretty good, a little bleak, a little relentless, but pretty entertaining movie, reasonably well done. Sicario 2 is such a bad movie that I was amazed that anybody could read that script and think, yeah, this is a good idea. And it takes incredibly rich source material, which is the cartel war going on the southern border, and makes it boring and really made it about human smuggling on a bus. And it was horrible. It was a horrible movie. The people who made it really should be embarrassed for the destruction of their craft over the course of the 2 hours of just trash. But there were scenes in that where you had drones, for example, I believe armed drones being used against the cartel. Could you foresee that happening? Well, here's the problem. If the cartels turn to the Mexican government, it's not clear the Mexican government would win that fight. It's even less clear how much separation there is between the cartels and the government of Mexico, such that if you started really shaking the tree, so to speak, looking at funding sources, looking at all kinds of different connections along the way, how many politicians would come up clean? If you really wanted to know who was getting funded by the cartels for elected office in Mexico, would you end up with a lot of politicians who, after that whole process, look like they really know what's going on and that they were honest and on the up and up? I don't think so. The cartels are having their most violent years ever the last 2 years, over 35,000 murders. I hate it when they do this thing. Oh, there are 40,000 gun deaths, or 35,000. Oh, no, I'm sorry, 30,000 gun deaths, I think it is, in America. Yeah, but about 20,000 of them are suicides. In Mexico, I'm talking about 35,000 murders, people killing other people. That's going on right now. You have stories that barely even get notice here of Mexican Marines, their more elite units getting ambushed, of Mexican police being overrun, being outgunned routinely by cartel hitmen, in many cases hitmen who have better training and better arms than the police. And we know that these cartels have billions and billions of dollars at their disposal. So what makes us think that they're not at some level really running Mexico? We should ask that question. Who really runs Mexico? Lopez Obrador? Or the cartels that can shut down a city with a phone call, have their gunmen spread all around, and have the national government back down from that fight? Remember, that just happened a few weeks ago. And for those who think, oh, Buck, that's not really even possible. In a country as corrupt as Mexico, that's not possible, that the cartels are the ones behind the scenes really running Mexico. Okay, well, keep in mind that in Venezuela, you have a number of individuals up to, I believe, the vice presidential level. I think it's the vice president or the number 3 guy in Venezuela in the Maduro regime is listed by our Treasury Department as a drug trafficker. Yeah, that's right. Venezuela is run by narco kingpins pretending to be social justice warriors. But they're very much involved in the drug trade. That's how they're getting hard currency. It's how they're able to continue to pay people off and stay in power. So that's just on record. You can go see that yourself. It's really stunning. The leadership of a country as large and sophisticated as Venezuela is a bunch of drug dealers. The people in charge, running the country. I'm sure Maduro, by the way, Maduro probably tries to keep a little, he's like the guy that never touches the drugs, but he's behind the scenes. He's getting a taste. I'm sure they're kicking him all kinds of cash. Otherwise, how could you keep people in your administration who really raises the question, why isn't Maduro listed as a drug kingpin? Probably just because it would be so destabilizing. Because then we'd have to say, well, maybe we just got to take this guy off the battlefield, and now we're seizing the foreign head of state. So, it gets tricky. But I'm sure Maduro's a drug dealer, too. Come on. Of course. Oh, he just imagine this, the Obama administration, you found out, and some of you are going to be like, oh, Buck. No, if the Obama administration, you found out that Joe Biden or Nancy Pelosi was involved in smuggling large amounts of cocaine, I think the Obama administration would have had a problem with that. I don't think President Obama would be like, yeah, they got to make some cash on the side. To his credit, he would not have had the continuation of those people in his employ. Venezuela, you don't have that. Venezuela, like, oh yeah, designated as drug kingpins, must all be lies from those, Yankee American types. No way. What's really going on in Mexico, folks? Do we even want to know? This is where we start to have to ask some really tough questions. Do we want to get to the bottom of it? Once you start looking at the money trails and seeing who the cartels are paying off and how, where does that stop? What reason do we have to believe that you don't have many of the most powerful people in the Mexican government who are our counterparts in dealing with Mexico on the take? Given how corrupt this country is, given how completely inept its judiciary is. And the courts in Mexico are a sham. It's a joke. Everybody knows this. Law enforcement, this is not a poor country. Mexico's not a poor country. I was just in Mexico City over the summer. There's a lot of wealth there. We have a lot of uneducated, poor Mexican workers who have been coming into this country in the last few decades. But it's not a poor country. This is not El Salvador. So what is it that has let this country continue to be just such an exemplar, really, of corruption, of inept governance? Why is it that no one really expects crimes in Mexico to be prosecuted? These are the questions that should be asked. These are the questions that the Mexican government should have to answer. Instead, they're going to get all huffy about how, Americans better not take any unilateral action in our country. Well, here's the problem with that. The cartels are killing thousands of Americans. I'm seeing more people. You've heard me say this now for many, many months. The cartels are directly responsible for killing Americans. They are putting pills on the streets here that are made to look like pills that they are not. This is really no different than if the cartels were selling, bootleg vodka, and it's really rat poison in the vodka in this country. Imagine if the cartels did that and were killing thousands of people with, poison-laced vodka that they were selling here. And that's more or less what they're doing by putting OxyContin on the streets. That's not OxyContin. It's opioids that they have made themselves. It's fentanyl that they're saying is OxyContin. They're killing thousands of Americans. A lot more Americans are being killed by the Mexican drug cartels than have ever been killed by the Islamic State, my friends. And look at all the expenditure of resources and effort to go after ISIS in Syria. So do I think designating them as a foreign terrorist organization is the right move? I do. And by the way, they do. People are saying, they're not terrorists. Yes, they are. They use violence to get state compliance and state to back off of law enforcement efforts, and they've established full control in whole regions of Mexico. I mean, of course, they use violence for explicitly political ends. It's to turn Mexico into a narco state. So it's not like you could separate this from politics. It's not just petty street crime. They're trying to control the government. They got the government to back off of a gunfight with them a few weeks ago. So we're holding the city hostage. But I'm telling you, the Trump administration, especially if Trump stays in office, Democrats will just wimp out on this whole thing, and they won't, oh no, Mexico's perfect. Anything bad in Mexico is the fault of America. That's the Democrat line. But if you have a Trump administration that comes in for 4 more years in office and they really pursue this thing, I think it's the right thing to do. But a lot of people aren't going to like what we find out about the truth of the cartels and the Mexican government. That much I am very confident in. Let's talk about Greta Thunberg for a moment here, folks. Darren Aronofsky, the director who's made some decent movies and some terrible movies recently, he wrote in the New York Times about how she provides the imagery that the climate change movement really needs. Well, you would think that argument would be more important than imagery, but that's not the case. But Thunberg wrote something just a couple days ago, or had it, I don't know if she had it written for her, but she put her name on this. And I have to tell you, my friends, those of us who say that this is not really, that climate change is not really about climate, we have all this evidence to point to. We can show you time and again that this is about much more than that. It is about power. This is what she writes in this. This is projectsyndicate.org. I don't even know what that is. This is Greta Thunberg, global icon now of the climate change movement. Here's what she writes. The climate crisis is not just about the environment. It is a crisis of human rights, of justice, and of political will. Colonial, racist, and patriarchal systems of oppression have created and fueled it. We need to dismantle them all. Our political leaders can no longer shirk their responsibilities. Colonial, racist, and patriarchal systems of oppression are the reasons for the climate. I thought it was about science and CO2 going in there. I thought it was about industry and mechanization and the usage of the combustion engine and fossil fuel in cars. And it's about, no, colonial, racist, and patriarchal systems of oppression. My friends, climate change is just about socialism. That's really what it is. It's ultimately a means of empowering the state to engage in the central planning to bring about not just a nation state of radical egalitarianism, of radical equality, but to bring about a world of radical equality. That, to me, is deeply disturbing and should be deeply disturbing to all of you. There was another individual. I don't know who this guy is, but I thought this was great. This guy, Zach Cantor on Twitter, he's a blue check. I'm not sure what he does, but he wrote this, I assume in response to this conversation about Greta right now and how it's not just about climate change. He wrote, one huge drawback of nuclear power is that it doesn't dismantle systems of oppression. It only produces clean energy. This makes it unsuitable for solving the climate crisis, which isn't just about the environment. The climate crisis is not just about the environment. The left says this openly. They tell you this. They speak about this. And then when you say, well, hold on a second, is this really about climate or is this about other things? They say, oh, how dare you? Don't you care about the earth? Don't you care about saving the planet for future generations? Oh, my gosh. As I sit around and say, well, hold on a second. I'm being told here by an icon in the movement that it's about dismantling the patriarchy. What does climate change have to do with the patriarchy? Oh, well, if climate change is just the excuse of hysterics to empower the government in ways that nobody would have dreamed of before, to do anything it wants to do with everything justified under the rubric of climate change, well, then you have all the power you need for the utopian society that we brought about by the extreme equality of the superstate. That's what climate change is really all about. New York City has the stupidest gun laws anywhere in the country, with the possible exceptions of Washington, D.C. and Chicago. But, I mean, New York could be the worst. Depends on which specific area. I mean, I'm here in the city, and it's completely absurd what they put you through as a gun owner. And I've got to tell you that you see here the dishonest, the bad faith way that opponents of the Second Amendment, because that's what they are, the bad faith way that they do things in left-wing enclaves like New York that show that they're unserious about the Constitution and the law, and that they just want to abuse their power when they can because they don't like people owning guns. They don't like people who own guns. That is all a part of this. Let's just look at this case for a moment. Here's the way it works in New York City. You have to go through a process, which I keep saying I'm going to go through it. I keep getting delayed with life and other things. But you go through a process to get a handgun here that takes about 5 months, costs $500, lots of paperwork, lots of background check, lots of things going on here. And it's meant to be onerous. Now, remember, Second Amendment, whatever, you got to pay big fees, you got to go through all this hassle and everything else. Voting, if you just have to say, hey, here's an ID that I need for pretty much everything else in life, but I'm just showing it, liberals freak out about that. Oh, it's an infringement on the right to vote. What about infringements on the right to bear arms? Oh, they don't care. That doesn't matter. And that doesn't somehow fall under the rubric of rights as far as they are concerned. It is something else. It is a right to be intentionally dismantled and undermined. That's what they do. So the way it works in New York is you can get a premise permit for a handgun. You have the premise permit. Now, that means you must keep it in your home, the handgun in a locked box, a trigger lock on the handgun in the locked box, which means it's great. If a burglar comes or somebody, is threatening you, home invasion, you have a very heavy projectile. Think of it almost like a paperweight now that you can throw at him, because that's about the likelihood that you're going to be able to get to your gun in time. And have ammunition kept in a separate locked box. That's the rule here in New York City. And so then the rule was that you could take it in those locked boxes to a so from your home, you could transport it to a designated gun range. Keep in mind, if you break any of these rules, they arrest you. You spend your weekend in prison, and you're threatened with years in prison if, in fact, they convict you, even for a minor violation of this. I mean, New York City is the same place where people who were transporting their legally owned and possessed firearms, but transiting through a New York airport, and then if the flight was canceled and you had to get your stuff in that New York airport, when people came back to that airport to get on the flight to get them to the place they were going to where they were legally allowed to have that gun, New York arrested people for that. New York would arrest people for that. Shameful. Appalling. And the officers involved in that should feel badly about it because it was wrong. But nonetheless, that gives you a sense of the mentality here around guns. So here's what New York did. They said, okay, fine. You can take it to a firearms range in the city where I think there's there's 2 or 3 of them in the whole city, and they're not nice. But you can't take the gun that you've gone through all this process with. You cannot transport it outside city limits. So New York State, you're not allowed to take your gun in New York. So it's really like the city of New York owns this gun, and you're renting it from them, and you can't take it outside of New York City. This is absurd. How is this the right to bear arms? I mean, the state, New York City is in New York State, so you can't have reciprocity with the rest of New York State with your legally owned. Who thinks this is going to stop any violence, by the way, or stop anything from going? It's idiocy, and it's completely unjustifiable under any understanding of the Second Amendment, and also just common sense. The only people that were going to get in trouble for this were people who, were for some reason leaving New York City, and they tell an officer, I've got this firearm that I'm transporting to, my house in upstate New York, or I'm going to see my grandparents. I want to go shoot with them somewhere, in Syracuse or in, Dutchess County or wherever. And, people, Albany, and people will get in trouble with the police for telling them honestly what's going on because you're not allowed to take the gun. They probably would confiscate the gun. I mean, who knows what else would happen. Not allowed to take it outside the city. You're violating a New York City law by doing that. That's so stupid. It's so absurd. You already have possession of the firearm, so why create this weird city limits violation for the rest of the state? Well, it turns out that the libs knew this was a crap law. The libs knew that this was meant to just stick a thumb in the eye of legal gun owners, people that want to enjoy their Second Amendment rights in New York City. And so the moment that a challenge was brought to this, a court challenge, New York City repealed the law. Oops, sorry, psych. Didn't mean to do that. Not even willing to defend it. Now, Supreme Court heard oral arguments about this today for about an hour. People are saying that, of course, the liberals, because they're policy people, they're not really judges. Ginsburg and all the rest. They're not people that are there. Kagan and Sotomayor. They're there to give the left what they want. That is their role in the court. That is the only reason that they are on the court, to give the left what they want. They're not interpreting the law. They're not. They're claiming now, well, this is all moot because New York repealed this law. Okay, but they're not supposed to have cat and mouse games with the legislature of different states or cities, my friends. Okay, imagine for a second that New York passed a literacy test to vote. Oh, we got to have you do a literacy test before you vote. And the Supreme Court said, "Whoa, hold on a second. You can't do that." And then New York says, "Oh no, it's okay. We're going to repeal that literacy vote test." Because the Supreme Court has said they'll look at it. What's to stop them, by the way, from just saying in a few months, when the court's not able, in the court process, they'll just keep on going. Oh, no, let's put that law back in place. Let's have that literacy test again, just in time for the election. Oh, the Supreme Court's going to review it. Oh, let's pull that away. This is the way that liberals abuse process. When I talk to you about how they don't do things in good faith, this is obviously bad faith. They passed a law. They should be willing to stand up for that law against the Supreme Court. Or they should admit that they were in error and say that they'll never do this again, which they have not done. Of course, the libs are scared here that what the Supreme Court might do, even though this law is no longer on the books, is perhaps weigh in on whether or not the right to bear arms also has to include the right to, in some capacity, transport and keep on your person arms. This is what has not been decided. D.C. v. Heller said that you do have a right, if you are a law-abiding citizen of the United States, you do have the right to have a gun in your home. And there cannot be insurmountable restrictions put on this, as D.C. had done, essentially regulating away your right. That's what they do. This is what the socialists, the statists, the Democrats, what they do all the time. They use regulation as a means of replacing legislative fixes that they want. They just say, well, this is the way this is going to go. This is how we're going to do this going forward. So, my friends, to this I would just point out that you cannot tell me that liberals didn't know that this law was stupid and unconstitutional from the start. I hope the Supreme Court writes a more sweeping opinion, but they may just say, oh, well, I guess there's no law anymore. Because the conservatives on the court might say, although I think we can trust Thomas to realize this creates such a bad taste in the mouths of any honest and decent American that you're going to have cities pass laws that will send people to prison, perhaps. And then the moment the Supreme Court's going to say, well, hold on a second, they go, oh, no, sorry, just kidding. Really? You're going to pass laws that you won't? You're going to pass a law and keep it as a law until the Supreme Court wants to look at it, and then you make it go away because you don't want anyone to actually take an honest look at what's going on here and how unconstitutional and how tyrannical it is. This is how liberals operate, friends. The conservatives in the court will say, oh, well, it's not a law anymore, so we don't have, essentially, there's no standing here, there's no reason for us to weigh on this because they've already, but this is, just understand, this is how libs do it. They pass laws that they know to be unconstitutional, and they keep them in place as laws until they're going to be challenged on it, and then to avoid the American people finding out whether or not it is constitutional what they did, they just say, oh, no, we're going to repeal it. Bad faith. This is what Democrats do. It's how they operate. Bad faith.
It's time for roll call.
It is roll call time, everybody. I have missed you all. I have missed the roll call. And I'm excited to get the opportunity to talk to you about it now. So, fantastic. Let's get to it. Ed writes, hey, Buck, where can I get a commie bear? I watched you on the Blaze way back and love the commie bear. 'Tis the season. Do you have a store? Ed, commie bear is currently on injured reserve. He's not formally retired, but he hasn't been in the game for a little while. I don't know, especially now that we have the Pluto TV. Channel 248, the best thing on Pluto TV. The free app that you should all download for your phones, and you can watch the show every day. Now that we have it, perhaps we should bring back the bear. I've been thinking about it for some time. I'm thinking that it would be quite fun, but it's just a question of how much more work I can put into things. But the answer is, I don't think we do have a store up right now on bucksexton.com, although I should probably check. I'm not aware of us having. Producer Brandon, do we have a store up? Do we know? You don't know. Producer Brandon will find out. He's in for, oh, that's right, Producer Mark. Guess what? Right now, while we're all freezing our butts off in New York City, Producer Mark is drinking pina coladas on his very well-deserved honeymoon in Jamaica. I will say it was a great wedding, a lot of fun out in Long Island. Some Team Buck folks were there, just guests of the wedding, nothing to do with me. I didn't really know anybody. I just walked around, Ate some sushi. They had a sushi table. I gotta say, I like the sushi. But anyway, producer Mark's wedding was beautiful. Him and his wife seemed like they were having a fantastic time. Everything came off very, very well. So I was really happy for him. And right now he's on the beach in Jamaica, I'm sure, not thinking about us here in the Freedom Hut, which is the way it should be. He'll be back in 2 weeks, by the way. He's taking off. He's going to enjoy himself. I know, right? Producer Brandon, you better be. We got to keep you healthy, man, because if you get sick, we're going to like third string quarterback. That's not good.
I was worried because, of course, he leaves when we finally get snow here in New York. Like, he planned it. So I'm like, what if I get stuck? What am I going to do? What is Buck going to do?
I don't know.
These things keep me up at night.
It'd be a mess in here, man. I can barely. I still have trouble switching from like my DVR, or rather from my smart TV to normal cable. This is a challenge for me every day. So if you weren't in here to do all the things with the screens, we'd be in bad shape.
Well, if there's a snowstorm, I'll just sleep in the studio. It's okay.
Thank you. That's the dedication we expect from people that help keep the Freedom Hut running. Sherry writes, "Love the show. Listen every night on the podcast." Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Sherry. Is it Sherry, Mon Chéri, or Sherry, or just Sherry? Could be either one. If it's American, it's Sherry. But perhaps we'll call her Sherry because she is very fancy. She likes to listen on the podcast. How was the mac and cheese at Producer Mark's wedding? We need details. Was it penne pasta, elbow pasta, cheddar cheese, a mix of cheeses? Oh, Sherry. Producer Brandon and I were talking about this, and I don't know. I mean, we're happy that Producer Mark is enjoying himself on the beach right now and working on his tan and being a newly married man. It's fantastic. But there was no gluten-free mac and cheese at that wedding. I asked several members of the staff who were involved in the food service part of this, and they asked the head chef, and there was never. So I don't know. A little bit of a bait and switch. I had gluten-free mac and cheese promised, and you know what I ended up having? Salmon fillet without any sauce. Now, look, the food at the wedding was great for everybody else. Maybe it's my fault that I'm genetically inferior and have celiac disease. That said, my little salmon fillet was not gluten-free mac and cheese and had no sauce.
You promised you gluten-free mac and cheese.
We talked about
on
this.
The air.
I was promised gluten-free mac and cheese. And did that happen? It did not.
We have the tape.
We do have the tape. We could roll tape on this one. So it's very clear to me that this is where it's at right now. But that's all right. We're I'm not gonna bother Producer Mark on his honeymoon about the lack of gluten-free mac and cheese. But when he comes back in a couple of weeks, some of you have to remind me when we get Producer Mark back in the mix that you promised that to a man. You got to keep that promise. So we might have to have him come in with some homemade gluten-free mac and cheese for the Buckster, because perhaps courtesy of now Mrs. Mark. Maybe she's better in the kitchen. Or not. I like cooking. That was not a sexist comment, just to be clear. Michael writes in, "I already benefited from free health care because I reset my elbow." Roll call. All right, Michael, thank you. I don't know what we're really talking about here, but it was fun while it lasted. Robert writes, "Dude, a meat connoisseur like you ain't had pot roast? Ask a butcher to give you a brick of beef to slow cook. I often use crock pot with potatoes, carrots, and sweet onion. You're still young, Buck." Yeah, I don't know. I mean, pot roast. I don't think I've ever had pot roast. Have you had pot roast? Is it good?
Might be one of my favorites.
Really?
Of the
Stewed
meats.
meat. I mean, stewed meat is delicious usually. So.
Yeah, I mean, my grandma used to make it. My mom makes it. My girlfriend makes
I don't think
it.
I ever had pot roast growing up.
I think you're missing out.
I think I definitely had too many boxes of Kraft macaroni and cheese, though, which turns out if you were looking to put on the LBs, just have 2 boxes of Kraft mac and cheese for dinner every night. You'll get there real fast. But yeah, no, I have not had pot roast. Here we go. Uh-oh. Paula, right. Today you said turkeys for Thanksgiving, ham is for Christmas. Jesus would never have touched ham. Just a thought. Really like your show. Paula, I get what you're putting down there, but I'm still going to eat my ham at that time. Ham I am, said the Buck. Let's see. Eric, Buck, the morning after the last dim debate, Klobuchar stated on CNN that the Russians not only hacked our elections via dumb social media posts, but they attempt to hack voting machines. Can you comment on this? Eric, there have been some reports about some intrusions from malware stuff about the Russians, but no votes were changed, and it's all It's just being exaggerated by people for political purposes. That's going to be our first show back after Thanksgiving. Guys, Christmas is going to be here before you know it. So just strap in because we're going to have very exciting shows between now and then. And also Buck's birthday, which comes up later this month. Shields high.